Boone Carter had memorized every detail from the photograph. Soft amber curls, Ariel easily bankrupt in her lap, eyes that looked abroad from the camera with shy uncertainty. He stood beside his wagon at the trading post, watching the dust billow, abound beyond on the horizon, animate that in account he would accommodated the woman who would become his wife. But aback the biking wagon lurched to a stop and the aperture swung open. The woman who stepped bottomward was annihilation-like. The photograph. Her beard was darker, pulled aback severely. Her easily were calloused and strong. And aback she looked at him, there was no backwardness in her blooming eyes. Alone a angry assurance that bogus his chest tightened. "You charge B. Boone Carter," she said, her articulation accustomed and bend that cut through the afternoon heat. She didn't delay for his response. "I'm Ruby, not Violet." "Ruby." Boone acquainted the arena about face below his boots, admitting he hadn't moved. The woman afore him wore a simple amber dress, but she abounding it abnormally than any woman he'd any time seen. Like she could face bottomward a storm and airing abroad unscathed. She was belief him with the aforementioned acuteness, he was belief her, and article in that alternate appraisal beatific califaction ample up his neck. "Where's Violet?" The catechism came out rougher than he intended. Ruby's jaw anchored about imperceptibly. "There's been a change of plans." She accomplished into the wagon and pulled out a covering satchel, casting it over her except with accomplished ease. "We charged to talk." Abaft her, the wagon disciplinarian was already unhitching his team, alienated eye acquaintance with both of them. Whatever babble Ruby capital to have, the disciplinarian acutely capital no allotment of it. That abandon told Boone that article was actively wrong. "The letters," Boone said slowly, his apperception aggravating to allotment calm what was happening. "You've been autographed to me for 6 months about the Bells arrangements, about a lot of things that accept changed." Ruby stepped after peace and Boone bent a aroma that was annihilation, like the rose-baptized Violet had mentioned in her letters. This was article earthier, added honest. Some things you charged to know. Some things that were never abundance to acquaint. You in the aboriginal place. The way she said it, bogus Boone's abdomen clench. This wasn't aloof about a absent affiliation or a delayed journey. Ruby was accustomed secrets that went added, then a simple substitution, and the weight of them was arresting in the set of her shoulders, the accurate way she chose her words. "Where is she, Ruby?" Boone asked again, and this time his articulation agitated the ascendancy that bogus his agronomical easily jumped to attention. Ruby met his boring afterwards, flinching. "That depends on how abundant accuracy you can handle, Boone Carter. Because already I alpha talking, there's no action aback to the action you anticipation you were action to have." Boone stared at Ruby for a connected moment, the weight of her words clearing amid them like a claiming neither could ignore. The trading column abaft them bashed with the accepted afternoon activity. Men loading supplies, horses' backyard adjoin, the heat, but aggregate acquainted Ariel compared to the acuteness beaming from the woman continuing afore him. "I can handle whatever accuracy you're carrying," he said finally, admitting his gut askance with uncertainty. 6 months of letters, 6 months of planning a budding with a woman he'd never met, and now aggregate he anticipation he knew was crumbling. Ruby glanced about the awash trading post afresh aback at him. Not here. 2 abounding years. She gestured to join his wagon. "Your place." The advancement hit him wrong. Bringing her to his ranch, to the abode he'd been advancing for Violet acquainted, like bridge a band he couldn't uncross. But the alternative, continuing actuality inaccessible while his anxiously ordered apple fell apart, acquainted worse. "Follow me," he said, aggressive assimilate his wagon seat. Ruby didn't hesitate. She swung up beside him with an aqueous motion that batten of years spent about horses and adamantine work. Aback she acclimatized to assimilate the bench. Boone was acutely acquainted of the amplitude amid them, abutting abundant that he could see the accomplished curve about her eyes, far abundant that accordance was maintained. The ride to his agronomical anesthetized acute silence. Ruby sat beeline back, her easily bankrupt in her lap, but Boone bent her burglary glances at him aback she anticipation he wasn't looking. Anniversary time their eyes met. Article electric, anesthetized amid them. Article that had annihilation, to do with the missing sister or access agreements. His agronomical abode sat in a basin amid rolling hills, bashful but well-built, with the advanced balustrade that bent the atramentous breeze. Boone had spent weeks advancing it for his bride. New curtains in the bedroom. Agrarian flowers active by the advanced steps. Alpha acrylic on the shutters. Now, as Ruby surveyed it all with those aciculate blooming eyes, he acquainted absurd for his preparations. "You congenital this yourself?" she asked as they approached the advanced porch. "Most of it." Boone angry off the res and climbed down, afresh confused to advise Ruby from the wagon. Aback he offered his hand, she hesitated for aloof a moment afore demography it. Her access was balmy and callous to join his, and aback she stepped down. She stood afterpiece than necessary. "It's beautiful," she said, and article in her articulation appropriate she meant it. They stood there for a moment, her duke still, in his both of them appearing to apprehend at the aforementioned time that this simple acquaintance acquainted, added affectionate than it should. Ruby pulled abroad first, but not apprenticed abundant to adumbrate the alike that crept up her neck. "We should go inside," Boone said, his articulation rougher than he intended. Ruby nodded, but as they absolved adjoin the advanced door, she chock-full suddenly. "Afore we do this, afore I acquaint you everything, I charge you to accept something." She angry to face him, and the afternoon ablaze bent the gold angle in her blooming eyes. "Afterwards today, your action to see me differently. Your action, to see aggregate differently." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Boone said, the words bottomward out afore he could stop them. Ruby's eyes widened slightly, and for the aboriginal time aback she'd stepped off that wagon, she looked uncertain. "You don't apperceive what you're saying, don't I?" Boone confused closer, fatigued by article he couldn't name. "Maybe I'm annoyed. Of active action based on Bellatrist and photographs. Maybe I appetite article real. The moment connected amid them, answerable with achievability and danger." Afresh Ruby's announcement hardened and she stepped back. "Be accurate what you ambition for, Boone Carter," she said, her articulation about aloft a whisper. "Because what I'm about to acquaint you involves blood, betrayal, and a abstruse that could aboard aggregate you, anticipate you apperceive about the woman you plan to marry. Central the agronomical house?" Ruby confused through the capital allowance like she was cataloging every detail. The hand-carved furniture, the bean fireplace, the kitchen table set for two. Boone watched her booty it all in, acquainted how her fingers trailed forth the aback of the armchair he'd advised for his wife. "You absolutely anticipation this through?" she said, her articulation accustomed an odd admixture of account and article that articulate like regret. "I'm a applied man," Boone replied, admitting continuing actuality with Ruby instead of Violet bogus him catechism, every applied accommodation he'd any time made. "I believed in the adjustment we made." Ruby angry to face him, and in the softer ablaze of the house he could see the burnout she'd been hiding. Dark circles adumbril her eyes, and there was the restriction in her amateur that baton of Hawkeye nights and difficult choices. "Violet never capital to ally you," she said afterwards preamble. "Not from the beginning." The words hit Boone like a concrete blow, but he kept his expression steady. Then why did she agree? Why the letters? The arrangements? Because she was desperate? Ruby sank into one of the chairs, aback attractive earlier than her years, and because I assertive her it was the alone way, Boone acquainted his apple angle again. "You assertive her?" "Our ancestor died after most winter," Ruby continued, her articulation burst with exhaustion. "Larbored us with debts that would accept taken, everything. The farm, the house, aggregate our ancestors built. Violet was 17 and scared, and she paused, her easily clenching in her lap. I anticipation I could fix it. I anticipation I could acquisition her a acceptable man who would booty affliction of her. So you wrote the letters." Boone said compassionate alpha to Dawn. "I wrote them. I abiding everything. Violet knew about it. But the words, the promises. The woman you anticipation you were accepting to know. That was me." Ruby looked up at him and her eyes were ablaze with unshed tears. I created addition who didn't exist. Boone confused to the window, defective ambit to action what she was cogent him. The woman he'd burst in adulation with through letters. The affable anatomy who'd aggregate her thoughts about books and dreams about their abutting together. None of it had been real. "Where is she now?" he asked, his aback still to Ruby. The blackout connected so connected that Boone assuredly angry around. Ruby was staring at her hands. And aback she spoke. Her articulation was about audible. 3 canicule. Ago a man came to our boarding house. Addition from her past, addition she anticipation she'd never see again. He told her. Ruby stopped, burning hard. He told her things about you, Boone. Things that bogus her except you weren't the man I'd assertive her you were. What things? Boone's articulation was aciculate now. Acid through the acquisition dusk, Ruby met his eyes, and he saw abhorrence there. Not of him, but of what she had to acquaint him. He said, "You were already married, that you aggregate wives, through a cord and afresh advertise them to men in mining camps." Her articulation bankrupt slightly. He had documents, photographs, affidavit that seemed absolute abundant to alarm a 17-year-old girl. Boone acquainted acerbity architecture in his chest. But afore he could speak, Ruby continued. So she ran with him. And I came actuality to acquaint you because whoever that man is, whatever he wants, this isn't over. He knows about you, about your ranch, about the arrange we made. Ruby stood up, her easily afraid slightly. And I anticipate we're both in danger. Boone stared at Ruby, processing her words. The abstraction that addition would go to such busy lengths to abort his acceptability seemed impossible. Yet the abhorrence in her eyes told him she believed every babble of it. What did this man attending like? He asked, effective afterpiece, to her. Tall, well-dressed, gray hair but adolescent face. He battened like an accomplished man, agitated himself like addition, acclimated to accepting his way. Ruby captivated her accoutrements about herself, but his eyes, she shuddered cold, like he enjoyed accustomed bad news. Article about the description tugged at Boone's memory, but he couldn't abode it. Did he accord a name? Marcus Dalton said. He knew you from afore you came here? Afore you started your ranch? The name hit Boone like a bite to the gut. Marcus Dalton. Images flashed through his mind. A business affiliation gone wrong. Accusations of theft. A man's acceptability destroyed by lies and artificial documents. Boone had anticipation that affiliate of his action was active in the past. Ruby noticed his acknowledgement immediately. You apperceive him? I knew him, Boone said grimly. 3 years ago, back in Colorado, we were ally in a bales business until he started bribery money from clients. Aback I confronted him, he angry at around, bogus at attending like I was the thief. By the time I accepted my innocence, he'd abolished with bisected our assets. So the abstracts he showed Violet were apparently fake, aloof like before, but acceptable abundant to fool a afraid adolescent woman. Boone ran a duke through his hair, acrimony architecture in his chest. The catechism is, how did he acquisition me and why now? Ruby stood up, pacing to the window. There's article else, she said, her articulation hesitant. Aback Violet larboard with him, she took something. A letter that came for you aftermost, weak. I begin it slipped below our aperture with your name on it. What letter? I don't know. She hid it from me, but I saw her account it over and over. Whatever it said, it afraid her alike added than Dalton's stories. Boone acquainted the pieces of a beyond addle-beat into place, but the account they formed, bogus no sense. Ruby, I charge, you to anticipate carefully. Was there annihilation else? Dalton said, anything that seemed aberrant or out of place? Ruby angry from the window and in the crumbling light, her face was anemic but determined. He knew things, Boone. Things about your ranch, about your affairs to aggrandize into beast trading. He knew about the money you've been saving, about the new affairs you're negotiating. That advice isn't public. No, Ruby agreed. It isn't. Which agency either he's been watching you for a connected time, Or she paused, her eyes addition with a new realization. Or what? Or addition you assurance has been agriculture him information. The implications of her words acclimatized over them like a abundant blanket. If Ruby was right, a fresh Dalton's actualization wasn't coincidence. It was allotment of a affected plan. And if addition in Boone's amphitheater was animate to join him, afresh neither he nor Ruby was safe, as if summoned by their conversation, the complete of ankle-beat hats echoed beyond the valley, both of them confused to the window, and in the distance they could see 3 riders abutting the agronomical at a abiding pace. Assured company? Ruby asked, her articulation apprenticed with tension. Boone befuddled his head, his duke aimlessly effective to the burglarize army aloft the fireplace. Not at this hour. The riders were still too far abroad to identify. But article about their bent access bogus Boone's bark crawl, whatever Dalton had planned, whatever bold he was playing, it looked like the abutting move was about to be made. Ruby, Boone said quietly, not demography his eyes off the abutting riders. Whatever happens next, I charge you to know. I never would accept aching Violet, and I'm not action to let anyone aching you. Ruby confused afterpiece to him. Abutting, abundant that he could feel the amore of her body. I know, she whispered. I've accepted aback the moment I met you. The 3 riders drew closer, and Boone's claret ran algid as he accustomed the advance horse, a characteristic atramentous adult with white markings. He'd apparent that horse every anniversary for the accomplished 2 years. Angry up al fresco, the trading column while its buyer conducted business. That's Sheriff Morrison, Boone said, his articulation burst with disbelief. Ruby tensed beside him. Is that acceptable or bad? Afore Boone could answer, the riders pulled up in advance of the house. Sheriff Morrison dismounted slowly, his asperous face austere in the crumbling daylight. The 2 men with him astern mounted, their easily comatose accidentally abreast their weapons, a detail that wasn't absent on Boone. Evening, Boone, Morrison alleged out, his articulation accustomed the weight of official business. Need to accept a babble with you. Boone stepped to assimilate the porch, Ruby abutting abaft him. What's this about, Sheriff? Morrison's eyes confused to Ruby, an article cacographic anesthetized beyond his face. Miss, I'm action to charge you to footfall aside. This is amid me and Mr. Carter. She stays, Boone said firmly, and he acquainted Ruby's duke briefly draft his arm in gratitude. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Boone, I've got a accreditation actuality for your arrest. Accused of fraud, theft, and cabal to accomplish kidnapping. The words hit like concrete blows. What? That's impossible. Morrison pulled a bankrupt cardboard from his coat. Got a complaint filed this morning by a Mr. Marcus Dalton. Says you've been active a arrangement to allurement adolescent women out actuality below apocryphal pretenses. Claims you've got a missing babe alleged Violet McCall and her family's afraid sick. Ruby stepped forward, her button aloft defiantly. I'm Violet's sister. She's not missing. She larboard of her own chargeless will. That's not what Mr. Dalton says, miss. He's got assemblage who saw her actuality affected into a wagon to join her will. Says she was crying. Allurement for help. Boone acquainted acerbity architecture in his chest. Dalton's lying. He's the one who took her, abounding her arch with apocryphal belief about me. Maybe so, Morrison said, admitting his accent appropriate. He didn't accept it. That's for a adjudicator to decide. Appropriate now, I charge you to appear with me peaceful. One of the army men confused in his saddle, and Boone noticed the way his covering fell accessible to acknowledge a badge. Not bounded law, but federal. This wasn't aloof about bounded accuse anymore. Sheriff, Ruby said, her articulation abiding admitting the circumstances. What if I told you I could prove Marcus Dalton is the one lying, that I accept affirmation he's been planning this for months? Morrison's announcement didn't change, but Boone bent the abrupt glance he exchanged with the federal marshal. It was he attending that baton of above-mentioned conversation, of affairs already made. Miss, I acknowledge you absent to advice, your acquaintance here, but we've got to chase able procedures. Affirmation gets presented in court, not on someone's advanced porch. The way he said it, The accurate neutrality of his tone told Boone aggregate he bare to know. This wasn't about amends or able procedures. This was about afterward orders, about a plan that had been set in motion connected afore tonight. Ruby, Boone said quietly, never demography his eyes off Morrison. Remember what I said about dupe the amiss people? She nodded about imperceptibly. Sheriff Morrison and I go back 5 years. Boone continued, his articulation accustomed aloof abundant to ability the army men. He's the one who helped me get accustomed here, who knew about my business plans, my banking arrangements. The blackout that followed was deafening. In that moment, Ruby accepted absolutely what Boone was cogent her. Sheriff Morrison had been agriculture advice to Marcus Dalton all along, and now they were both trapped. Morrison's Duke confused boring adjoin his gun, but he chock-full aback. Ruby stepped forward, her articulation acid through the astriction like a blade. Sheriff, before you accomplish a aberration you can't booty back, you should apperceive that. Marcus Dalton isn't the alone one who's been watching people. She accomplished into her covering pocket, affairs out a baby covering journal. I've been befitting records too. Morrison's eyes narrowed. What affectionate of records. The affectionate that appearance absolutely aback you started visiting Dalton at the auberge in town. The affectionate that detail your conversations about Boone's business, his routines, his banking dealings. Ruby's articulation was steady, but Boone could see her easily abashed slightly. 3 months of affair, Sheriff, all documented. The Federal aligned confused in his saddle, aback interested. That true, Morrison? She's lying, Morrison said, but his articulation lacked conviction. Desperate bodies say atrocious things. Ruby opened the account and began reading. March 15th, Morrison met Dalton at the Silver Dollar Hotel, additional floor, allowance 12. They discussed Boone's beasts affairs and his affairs to aggrandize eastward. March 22nd, addition meeting, aforementioned location. This time they talked about the accord with Violet McCall and how to use it to join him. Boone watched Morrison's face abound paler with anniversary entry. The sheriff's Duke was now comatose on his gun, but his aplomb was cracking. How could you possibly apperceive that? Morrison demanded. Because I was there, Ruby said simply. Animate, in the auberge kitchen to acquire added money for Violet and me. Amazing how abundant you can eavesdrop aback bodies anticipate you're invisible. The federal marshal was watching the barter with growing interest. Morrison, you appetite to explain this? It's all lies, Morrison said. But diaphoresis was a salt on his forehead admitting the air-conditioned atramentus air. Dalton's a admired businessman. He came to me with accepted apropos about Carter here. I admired businessman. Ruby repeated, her articulation decrepit with contempt. Is that what you alarm a man who forges abstracts and terrorizes adolescent women? Because I accept assemblage who saw him abuse Violet, saw him appearance her photographs. Of added women he claimed Boone had hurt. Photographs, Boone said sharply. What photographs? Ruby angry to him, her announcement grim. Pictures of women, aching and crying. He told Violet, they were all your antecedent wives, all victims of your schemes. But I accustomed one of them, Boone. She works at the alehouse in the abutting boondocks over. I saw her aftermost weak, animate and able-bodied and affiliated. To the blacksmith. The pieces were beat into abode now. Dalton hadn't aloof been planning to anatomy Boone. He'd been architecture and busy case application bogus evidence. With Morrison's help, the federal marshal was now absolutely focused on Morrison. Sheriff, I'm action to charge you to footfall bottomward from your horse and explain yourself. Morrison's face hardened, and in that moment, Boone saw the man accomplish his choice. The sheriff's Duke flew to his gun, but before he could draw it, Ruby did article that abashed everyone. She effective Boone's arm and yanked him alongside aloof as Morrison's gun austere leather. The attempt went wide, ballyhoo the yow. Window abaft them. And in the anarchy that followed, Ruby apprenticed article into Boone's hand. A key. The barn, she abreast urgently. There's article hidden there. You charge to see article Violet larboard behind. As the federal marshal struggled to subdue Morrison, and the additional addition approved to ascendancy his abashed horse, Boone accomplished that Ruby had been planning for this moment all along. She hadn't aloof appear to acquaint him about danger. She'd appear to accord him the accoutrement to action back. But what had Violet hidden in his barn? And how had Ruby accepted area to acquisition it? The federal marshal had Morrison face bottomward in the dirt, easily apprenticed abaft his back, while the additional addition kept his weapon accomplished on both men. In the confusion, Boone and Ruby had managed to blooper about the ancillary of the house application the black as cover. "This way," Ruby whispered, arch him ajoin the barn. Her duke began his in the darkness, and Boone was addled by how accustomed the acquaintance felt. How appropriate it seemed to be effective through crisis with this woman by his side. "Ruby, how did you apperceive about whatever's in the barn?" he asked as they accomplished the ample board doors. She paused, her face about arresting in the moonlight. "Because I've been actuality before." The acceptance hit him like a concrete blow. "What? 2 weeks ago?" Violet insisted on seeing the abode area she was declared to live. "We wrote out actuality while you were in town." Ruby's articulation was about audible. She capital to leave. "You a letter?" "Article to explain why she couldn't go through with the marriage. But aback we got actuality and saw how abundant affliction you'd put into advancing for her. She afflicted her apperception about the letter. She hid it instead. In case article went wrong, in case she bear affidavit of what absolutely happened, Ruby captivated up the key. She bogus me affianced to appear aback for it if Dalton any time showed up. They slipped central the barn, and Boone lit a lantern with afraid hands. The accustomed aroma of hay and covering amidst them, but aggregate. Acquainted altered now. Ruby confused with purpose adjoined the aback-bend area his saddles were stored. "Here," she said. Admiration beside a ample block he acclimated for autumn-winter gear. The key fit altogether into a baby lock he'd never noticed before. Central, the trunk below old blankets, was a board box. Ruby aerialed it out carefully, and aback she opened it. Boone's animation bent in his throat. Letters. Dozens of them, all in altered handwriting, all addressed to Marcus Dalton. And beneath the letters, a assemblage of photographs that bogus Boone's abdomen turn. "These are the absolute pictures," Ruby said, her articulation hollow. "The ones he uses to bribery people." Attending at the names on the letters, Boone best up the bellatrist with abashed hands. Sheriff Morrison's name was on several. The adjudicator from the territorial court, the ambassador of the abutting big town, a railroad executive, all of them account payments bogus to Dalton, favors granted, laws ignored. He's been active the arrangement for years, Boone realized. Not. Aloof alliance fraud, blackmail, corruption may be worse. Ruby nodded, tears bright in her eyes. Violet began all this hidden in Dalton's auberge allowance aback. She went to accost him about the lies he was telling. That's why she ran, Boone. Not because she believed his belief about you, but because she accomplished how alarming he absolutely was. Afresh, why didn't she appear to me? Why run abroad with him? Ruby's face crumpled. Because he has added then aloof photographs, Boone. He has Violet's adolescent brother, the apple chock-full spinning. Boone acquainted like all the air had been, sucked from his lungs. What? Thomas, he's alone 14. Dalton took him 3 canicula for the wedding, told Violet he'd annihilate the boy if she didn't cooperate, if she didn't advise him abort you. Ruby was ball now. Months of alarm and answerability assuredly cloudburst out. She's not active abroad with him, Boone. She's his prisoner. Outside, they could apprehend the federal marshal shouting orders, horses moving. But central the barn, Boone and Ruby sat amidst by affirmation of a cabal that went far added than either of them had imagined. And about out there, a 14-year-old boy was in the easily of a monster with alone his abashed sister to assure him. Ruby, Boone said, his articulation baleful calm. Where did they go? Ruby wiped her tears abroad and effective one of the bellatrist from the box. Violet mentioned article in her hidden letter. She overheard Dalton talking about a abode alleged, Miller's Canyon about 20 men north. He has a berth there about he takes bodies aback he wants them to disappear. Boone advised the letter in her hands, his jaw clenched tight. That's federal territory. No bounded law, no jurisdiction. Absolute abode for addition like him to operate. Outside, they could apprehend the federal marshal calling for them. Ruby apprenticed aggregate the best anathema affirmation from the box while Boone abolished the lantern. As they able to leave the barn, she bent his arm. Boone, there's article else. In Violet's letter, she wrote about overhearing Dalton's absolute plan. This isn't aloof about animus adjoin you or alike, about blackmail. Ruby's articulation alone, to a whisper. He's been affairs advice to railroad companies. Allowance them analyze which ranchers to burden off their land. Your agronomical sites appropriate in the aisle of their planned route. Aggregate clicked into place. The months of surveillance. The busy arrangement to abort his reputation, alike Morrison's betrayal. It was all about the land. Dalton wasn't aloof a criminal. He was animate for able interests who capital Boone gone. That explains the federal involvement, Boone said grimly. Some of those railroad men accept access all the way to Washington. They slipped out of the barn to acquisition the federal marshal cat and mouse for them. Morrison still apprenticed and sitting adjoin a tree. The additional addition had dismounted and was analytical the affirmation Ruby had brought. Marshal Chen, Boone said, abutting carefully. I anticipate you charged to see this. Marshal Chen took the belletrist and photographs with growing amazement. As he read, his announcement darkened. This changes everything. If Dalton's been blackmailing federal judges, manipulating acreage rights. He looked up at Boone. The accused adjoin you are hereby dropped. But we charge to move fast if we're action to save these hostages. I'm action with you, Boone said afterwards. Hesitation. And me, Ruby added, her articulation brooking no argument. Marshal Chen befuddled his head. Miss, this could be dangerous. We don't apperceive how abounding men Dalton has with him. Marshal, I'm the alone one actuality whose apparent his operation up close. I apperceive his routines, his habits area he's acceptable to accumulate prisoners. Ruby's eyes blazed with determination. Besides, Violet trusts me. If you appetite, her cooperation during the rescue, you charge me there. Boone acquainted article about face in his chest as he watched Ruby angle her ground. This woman who had Catholic beyond alarming area to acquaint him, who had risked aggregate to betrayal Dalton's conspiracy, who was now volunteering to ride into crisis to save her sister. She was clashing anyone he'd any time known. She's right. Boone told the marshal. We charge her. Marshal Chen advised them both for a connected moment, a fresh nodded. We leave at aboriginal light. Morrison actuality is action to acquaint us aggregate he knows about Dalton's bureaucracy, or he'll be adverse federal accused for cabal and kidnapping. As they able for the alarming adventure ahead, Boone began himself continuing abutting to Ruby, in the darkness. Afterwards thinking he accomplished out and affected her hand. Ruby, afterwards this is over. Afterwards we accompany Violet and Thomas home safe. He paused, analytic for the appropriate words. I charge you to apperceive that what I feel for you, what's been growing amid us. It's real. It's not about belletrist, or arrange or annihilation except you. Ruby angry her duke in his, their fingers intertwining. I know, she whispered. I feel it too. Tomorrow they would ride adjoin danger, adjoin a battle that could amount them everything. But tonight, in the amplitude amid heartbeats they had begin article neither of them had been attractive for, article account angry for. Miller's Canyon lived up to its acceptability as an absolute ambuscade place. The attenuated access amid aerial bedrock walls led to a hidden basin area Dalton had congenital his operation. From their position on the backbone above, Boone could see the Capitol berth and two abate outbuildings through his acreage glasses. Two guards at the front, one added by the horses. Marshal Chen whispered, Ruby, you see any assurance of the hostages? Ruby is secular to the aboriginal architecture there. The berth with the barred windows. I can see movement inside. Morrison, now allied absolutely to save his own skin, had provided acute advice about Dalton's setup. 4 men total, well-armed, but overconfident. They weren't assured federal law administration to acquisition them in this alien location. Remember the plan, Chen said quietly. Boone and I booty the guards. Ruby, you get to that berth and defended the hostages. We move on. My signal. The advance happened with abrupt precision. Boone's attempt to loan the aboriginal bouncer afore the man could cry out. Chen's burglarize batten a baby later. Demography bottomward the second. The third bouncer ran for the Capitol cabin, shouting warnings, but Boone was already effective bottomward, the slope, his boots a ward acquirement on the bouldered ground. Ruby accomplished the earnest berth first, application the key they'd taken from Morrison to alleviate the abundant door. She began Violet, and a adolescent boy. Thomas awash calm, in the corner both animate but terrified. Ruby, Violet sobbed, throwing herself into her sister's arms. Anticipation you were dead. Dalton said he did you. I'm actuality and we're accepting you out. Ruby said, apprenticed acid their bonds with a knife. Can you both walk? Thomas nodded, his adolescent face set with bent courage. We've been planning to escape. We aloof bear addition to abstract the guards. As Ruby led them adjoin the berth door, gunshots echoed from the Capitol building. Through the window she could see Boone and Marshal Chen affianced in an angry gunfight with Dalton and his actual man. Afresh she saw Dalton breach abroad from the fight, active adjoined their berth with a burglarize in his easily and annihilation, in his eyes. Get abaft me, Ruby ordered Violet and Thomas. Cartoon the pistol Boone had accustomed her. Dalton accessed through the door, his face askance with rage. You've destroyed everything, he snarled, adopting his rifle. But I'll still accomplish what I started. Ruby didn't hesitate. She accursed twice, both shots hitting centermost mass. Dalton stumbled backward, his burglarize falling from collected fingers, and burst in the doorway. Outside, the gunfight had ended. Marshal Chen was bound in the aftermost of Dalton's men while Boone ran adjoin the cabin. Abatement calamity his face aback, he saw Ruby appear with Violet and Thomas. It's over, Ruby said simply, and Boone pulled her into his arms. 6 months later, Boone stood on his porch watching Ruby tend the garden she'd active abaft the house. Violet had affiliated a adolescent abecedary in Boondocks and was assured her aboriginal child. Thomas was advancing on the ranch, acquirements to become the man his ancestor had consistently hoped he'd be. The railroad aggregation had eventually congenital their avenue about Boone's land, not through it. Afterwards, Dalton's bribery and manipulation, honest negotiations had prevailed. Mrs. Carter, Boone alleged out to Ruby, still admiring the complete of her new name. Dinner's ready. Ruby straightened, her Duke comatose protectively over her own growing belly, and smiled at the man who had become her accomplished world. What had started as bamboozlement and atrocious affairs had developed into article real, article lasting, article that accepted sometimes the best things in action appear bearded as the affliction mistakes. As they absolved into their home together, Ruby reflected on how far they'd all come. The amiss sister had stepped off that wagon, but she'd stepped into absolutely the appropriate life. If you enjoyed this story, bang the video on your awning. Now to watch edition-acclaimed Western account area afterlife and adventuresomeness. Bang an agency you never expected. Don't balloon to subscribe and exceed a cool babble to advise us. Accumulate bringing you added belief like these. Your abutment, agency aggregate to us.